الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم أجمعين. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. For Muslims, this is how we begin in the name of Allah, the Merciful, the Compassionate, recognizing that Subhanahu that transcendent is God, and glory be to Him, that we only have knowledge except we only know that which He's taught us Subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we say that we recognize that there's no hawl, that there's no strength, no quwwah, no power, except through with Allah Subhanahu wa ta'ala. And to the degree that we recognize that, to the degree that we will actually be given true strength and the true meaning of the word, that this is the first of a series of lectures, what is known as the Razjan tour, that we will inshallah be hearing from a number of different people, scholars, teachers, on a series of topics. And the idea behind this series was to look at the Sira in light of the Shama'il, or if you will, look at the Shama'il in light of the Sira. In other words, to combine the life story of the Prophet ﷺ and that highlight that his Shama'il, his inward and outward characteristics that manifest in the various mawaqif or position stages of his life, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And if we may, by way of introduction, let's speak about the importance of knowing our Prophet ﷺ. That this might seem like it's intuitive as Muslims, so of course you have to know the Prophet ﷺ. But there's a difference between knowing the Prophet and knowing the Prophet. And the second one in italics of truly knowing Sayyidina Muhammad ﷺ, where someone goes beyond a type of knowledge that comes from a book where they have an intimate connection to him ﷺ, and that all aspects of our deen, the building blocks of which are Iman, Islam, and Ihsan, that if they are infused and brought to life with a love of Allah and His Messenger, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and that if you look at Sadat and the Sahaba, the noble companions of Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and you look at everything that they were able to do in such a short amount of time, despite that being entirely unmanned and out-resourced in all across the board, that yes, it was divine intervention and tawfiq from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but there's also asbab, there's means that enabled them to be able to do this. And if I may at this point, that I tend to forget whether we discussed this last time I was here or not, but it's worth repeating in repetition if that was the case, that we have in our deen what are called thawabit and mutaghayyirat. We have unchanging principles and we have changing circumstances. And it becomes the challenge of every age and of every community and every individual Muslim to ground themselves in what are called the thawabit, these unchanging principles, and then interpret the mutaghayyirat, the changing circumstances of their time, based upon their grounding in the thawabit. And as the principle states, to the degree that we're grounded in the thawabit will be to the degree that we correctly assess, understand, and then respond to the mutaghayyirat, to the changing circumstances. And in other words, that if we're not grounded in the realities of our deen, not just in terms of knowledge, but even arguably more importantly, experientially, then we're going to make mistake after mistake after mistake after mistake after mistake in our response to the confusion of the time in which we live, let alone the time that seems pretty clear that our Prophet informed us, is that even the Halim would be mutahayyir. The Halim is the forbearant person, but it's also one of the names of the intellect, is that all of the beautiful names that we have for the intellect, like the Nuha, the Aql, that's ma'ruf, but the Nuha, and that the Halim is that the one who is forbearant based upon the strength of their intellect and their ability to see the big picture, and thus to have afu and al-maghfirah, and to be able to pardon even though they have the power to take vengeance, and to be able to respond calmly and collectively to any situation appropriately. So we live in a time that even the one who has great character and is extremely intelligent finds himself to be in a state of confusion, let alone the common person. So when you add that to the ingredient, that it shows the importance of constantly reminding ourselves and reconnecting ourselves to these foundational meanings. And everything that we do, that it leads to a coloring of the heart. As our Lord says, subhanahu wa ta'ala, وَصِبْغَةُ اللَّهُ مَنْ أَحْسَنُ مِنَ اللَّهِ صِبْغَةً, the coloring of God. And who was better in Sibla, coloring in God. Right? That's Sibla is also paint. Sabala is to paint, is to color something. And that your heart is colored. And just as the beautiful spectrum of colors that we have when we see bright light reflected through a prism, or refracted through a prism, when we see the different shades, and that we have the primary colors and the secondary colors and all of the other infinite type of colors that are between the two sides of the color spectrum, that all of that great beauty related to just outward colors, those that at least are perceptible to the eye, that the inner coloring of the heart is even more expansive and is even more beautiful, and that there's different shades and tints that our hearts have to become colored with in order to become beautiful. One of the greatest ways to color the heart is by attaching ourselves to the Shama'il, which we'll define shortly, the characteristics of our Prophet ﷺ and his Sira and his life story. And that part of the reason is that we were just having a conversation with an uncle before, that, and it's worth bringing up this juncture, that we live in a time where that we are more in need, from one perspective at least, a nuanced understanding of our deen. Whereas simultaneously, that we live in a time where many people's response to the time in which we live is a very black and white, dichotomistic type approach, which arguably would be the worst thing that could possibly happen. Because that in order for us to really, truly deal with the issues of our time, is that we have to ground ourselves deep within the depths of our tradition. And that this is one of the great aspects of our deen, is that the depth of our deen. And that we are, because we're disconnected to our tradition, what I mean by tradition is in particular the scholarly legacy that has been transmitted generation after generation until this day, is that quite literally the vast majority of issues of the time that we're living in, there's a precedence from scholarly discussions that have taken place previously. And that the few that are from the realm of ijtihad that need a new look at, and thus a new opinion, is that it's to look at those new things that need to be dealt with, that without grounding ourselves in the past, that this is one of the key problems, right? So that if you look at by way of example, that in order for someone to, just as is the development of any particular chapter of law, of fiqh, and you look at the development of that chapter and the new issues that came about in certain times, that there were certain issues that were set, positions that were clearly stated, that in order to truly be a faqih in the true sense of the word, is that you have to be rooted in what's already been delineated and already been established. Why? Because oftentimes what happens is you'll find parallels, right, then into what's already been established, and then that you relate it to new scenarios. And this relates just in general, to the process of learning of human beings. Is that the way that we hear certain things, we learn a piece of knowledge here, and we learn a piece of knowledge here, and we learn a piece of knowledge here, and then the way that we're able to connect, and then so if we have something here and here, and we're able to connect it, then, even if we haven't explicitly studied something that we learn is here, because the grid in our mind has been established as such that we understand that this particular point here, and that this is in the case of knowing in general, and in particular, in aspects of knowledge like fiqh and others. But this applies us also to that our approach to understanding our time. And so that in that regard, that one of the great examples of the difficult nature of much of the discourse that we're hearing nowadays, in the Muslim world in general, and in Western countries in particular, in the United States even more particular, is how we understand the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And that understanding the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and knowing the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is integral to everything that comes after it. And that if we do not know who he is sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and if we don't understand our relationship to him, and thus our relationship to the deen, that we are going to be extremely limited in terms of what we're going to be able to do. We're limiting ourselves in terms of what we're going to be able to do. And there is this idea that is very widespread now, that we hear it often on the minbar, and at the pulpit, and in our Yom Jum'ah, and throughout the Muslim world, and unfortunately a lot of the television stations that we're exposed to, is that this idea that the Prophet ﷺ was merely a man. He came, conveyed a message, and he returned to God. And he was a prophet, he was a messenger, and he was a message of creation. And now he's, I don't even like to say these type of words, he's dead. And he conveyed the message, so it's about the message, and that's it. And this is some people's understanding of our prophet. They said, that's it. That he came, now it's about Islam, and there's no need to focus on the prophet anymore, now because he's conveyed a message and a teaching. That what I'm going to present in this introductory lecture, how that is entirely ludicrous and extremely dangerous, and how that if we understand things that way, is that we are inhibiting ourselves from at the very deepest level of the reality of Iman in our heart, let alone everything that leads to, from understanding and comprehension and action and behavior and things that we do outwardly. That I would argue that this is as dangerous as it could possibly be for a number of reasons. Not the least, that to understand that Iman itself, that if you look at Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq, Allah mentions in the order in the Quran that وَمَنْ يُطِعِ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ فَأُولَٰئِكَ الَّذِينَ أَنْعَمَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِم مِّنَ النَّبِيِّينَ وَالصِّدِّيقِينَ وَالشُّهَدَاءِ وَالصَّالِحِينَ وَحَسُنَ أُولَٰئِكَ رَفِيقًا. That after the Anbiya, that we have the Siddiqeen. What is a Siddiq? Right? That a Siddiq is a sifa mubalagha for someone who's sadiq. So you have the trait of sidq, which is truthfulness, it's sincerity. But when you speak of it as being a sadiq, yes, he's a truthful person, but a Siddiq, in this context, is that an emphatic form of someone who has a lot of sidq, meaning from their truthfulness, that it is put them in a place where they can be an ultimate confirmer of truth. So a Siddiq is an ultimate confirmer of truth. And sidq has 6 different levels, the least of which is sidq al-lisan, where you have truthful speech. And then that increases and increases and increases until in all of these 6 dimensions that someone has, they become a Siddiq, like Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq. But if you look at Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq, that how did he become a Siddiq? Did he become a Siddiq from praying Qiyam al-Layl? That had a part to do with it, absolutely. Did he become a Siddiq from learning? Yes, that had a part to do with it. But what was the particular motive that actually led him to becoming Siddiq? It was related to Sayyidina Muhammad. It was related to Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That his belief in the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when after the Isra and Mi'raj, that the Prophet informed that everyone what had happened, that he traveled by night from Mecca to Bayt al-Maqdis, a 2-month journey, and the time that they used to travel by caravan in the Arabian Peninsula, and then he ascended into heaven, and that they informed everyone what he did. And there was people who actually left Islam, almost believers that happened. There were people that wanted to encourage the Prophet not to say anything because people wouldn't believe in him. And so they went to Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq. You all know the story. And they figured if they can get him, they can get everyone else. And what did he say? His famous words that should be written in gold. He said, if he said it, فَقَدْ صَدَقَ. If the Prophet said it, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, فَقَدْ صَدَقَ. He's true. He is true. Meaning that he and it was because of that he was given the epithet as-Siddiq. That mawqif, that position that he took in relation to belief in the Prophet ﷺ, is it what transformed him from being a believer and from the best of the believers to as-Siddiq al-Akbar, the ultimate confirmer of truth. Now, if I can dovetail off of that, and we take it back into the beginning of Surah Al-Baqarah, that when Allah Ta'ala says, Alif Lam Mim, ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. Okay, so he's explaining now in Tafsir the Hidayah that's mentioned in the verse we recited at least 17 times a day in the Fatiha, اهدنا الصراط المستقيم. Now we're reading the first Tafsir and the first breakdown of what this Huda and this guidance is, and then the rest of the Quran after that is a more detailed and more detailed and more detailed understanding of that guidance. But what is the first thing that Allah says? Say, الَّذِينَ يُؤْمِنُونَ بِالْغَيْبِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. The Quran is guidance for the people of taqwa. And that in and of itself needs to be analyzed and broke down. And then when you say it's the people of fear of Allah, it's so much more deeper than that. Yes, we can use that, but at times we need to explain the depths of the nature of taqwa and how it relates to the internal aspect of the human being and the decision-making process and very subtle, nuanced things that are taking place within the human being that would lead to someone to be a muttaqi, a person of taqwa. Taqwa is incredible, and this would be a great PhD for someone to talk about the psychology of taqwa. How does this process to attain taqwa relate to the human being? And it would be an amazing topic to really look into. Anyhow, the first trait of the muttaqin that Allah mentions is الَّذِينَ يُؤْمِنُونَ بِالْغَيْبِ, those who believe in the unseen. If something is unseen, how can you believe in it? If something is unseen, how can you believe in it? You're not seeing it, so how do you know that it exists? How do we know that there even is an unseen? How do we know that there even is a next world? How do we know what the realities of the next world are? If you're trained in theology, you know that the three breakdowns of theology, the later developments of Kalam, was you have the ilahiyat, you have the nubuwat, and you have the sam'iyat. Okay, so you have that which pertains to divinity, that which pertains to prophecy and prophethood, and what are called the sam'iyat, which are literally those things that are heard. Right? In other words, if something is sam'i, that it is a transmitted type of knowledge. It is not a knowledge that you can reach to through rational inquiry. It is a type of knowledge that is beyond that, meaning that it's not attained through rational inquiry. And so the sam'iyat that you would translate idiomatically as the eschatological events that begin at the end of time, death, the grave, and then everything after that to the one or two final abodes. But what I'm trying to get at here is, Allah Ta'ala says in another verse, in relation to Sayyidina Muhammad, وَمَا هُوَ عَلَى الْغَيْبِ بِضَنِينَ, in relation to Sayyidina Muhammad. And that he is not, in brackets, where he informs from the unseen, that muttaham, dhameen, that he's not questioned about what he informs from the unseen. Our way in which we know the realities of the unseen is only from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We know what we believe in the unseen because of our Prophet, because it was shown to him. We know about the realities of Jannah and Nar and Yawm al-Qiyamah and what happens in the Qabr and the reality of everything that happens in the realm of the unseen, of the Malaika and everything else in the previous books and so forth and so on from Sayyidina Muhammad. In other words, our belief in him sallallahu alaihi wasallam is equivalent to our belief in the unseen that Allah Ta'ala has required us to believe in, is the first trait of the believer. So how could you separate the Prophet ﷺ from our understanding of Islam? But on the contrary, it is integral. And this is why some of our scholars have said that Al-Hasan al-Basri said about the verse in the Quran, اهدنا الصراط المستقيم. The Sirat al-Mustaqim is Sayyidina Muhammad. And another ishara in the Quran is when Allah says, وَأَنَّ هَذَا صِرَاطِي مُسْتَقِيمًا. هذا is an ism ishara. And this is my Sirat al-Mustaqim. That there's an outward meaning of that, but by way of elusive interpretation, is that Sirati, this is my straight path, is that this is a reference to our Prophet ﷺ, is that he is the straight path. He is an embodiment of the straight path. He himself, in his essence, in his attributes, in his actions, and who he is the straight path solidified in human form, so it's easy for us to follow. But also beyond that, if you look at another verse, what Allah Ta'ala says, وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا, that hold fast altogether to the rope of God, وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا, right? And do not disperse amongst yourselves. That commentators have said that there's different meanings to the habl of Allah. But there are scholars who said that the habl of Allah refers to our Prophet ﷺ, that he is the habl of Allah. And then if you relate that verse to another verse, when Allah Ta'ala says, وَمَنْ يَكْفُرْ بِالطَّاغُوتِ وَيُؤْمِنْ بِاللَّهِ, and those who disbelieve in false deities and believe in Allah, فَقَدْ اسْتَمْسَكَ بِالْعُرْوَةِ الْوُثْقَى, indeed that they adhered to the firmest handhold. Again, some scholars say that this refers to our Prophet ﷺ. So, that if that's the case, that he's the Sirat al-Mustaqim, according to some interpretations, that he's also the habl of Allah, and he's also the urwat al-wuthqa, what is this indicating to us? Is that what is the idea of the habl of Allah? Because there's another hadith, all those multiple narrations, is that the Quran is the hablullah al-mamdud min as-sama'i al-ard. The idea of a habl is a sabab, it's a means, and even the word sabab also means rope. Is that it's something that you can hold on to when there's nothing else to hold on to. The firmest handhold, the urwat al-wuthqa, لَن فِصَامَ لَهَا, that will never break. There has to be something to combat the postmodern notion that everything is relative and there's no truth with a capital T, and it's just a bunch of relative truths with lowercase t's. That the fact of the reality is that there's a way to deconstruct that type of thought in and of itself. But our positive response to that is that it relates to your relationship with Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and your belief in him, in that belief in who he was, and that he is a prophet of God. And based upon your relationship of him and what you know about him, that is a habl that can never be broken. That is an urwat al-wuthqa that will never be broken. And so attaching ourselves to him and knowing him and moving beyond just merely a book type of knowledge of him, where we go beyond that, when we have an intimate relationship with him, where you start to see him in your dreams, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where you move up to the higher levels of faith, you move up to ilm al-yaqeen, to ayn al-yaqeen, to haqq al-yaqeen, where you start to experience the sweetness of faith, the halawat al-iman, ذاق طعم الإيمان رضي بالله ربا وبالإسلام دين محمدا نبيا ورسولا. That you move up in these ranks of certainty, that this is critical that we know who our Prophet is. Because if that you remove that relationship to him, you are removing from the believer in the postmodern world ability to affirm truth with a capital T. Now that is a big claim that is made. And we're no way we're going to fully be able to get into all the dimensions of that in a 1 hour, 2 hour course. But I firmly believe that. And one of the greatest proofs of that is scripturally, is what we know about Sayyidina Abu Bakr. That is how he became a Siddiq. And so if we understand that, and this is just one aspect of it, this is at the heart of it, which in terms of our belief and our certainty, because our Prophet said, al-yaqeen al-iman kullu, that certainty is all of faith. Faith is about certainty. And that this is something that we have to be very clear about. What is certainty? How do we attain certainty? And study the different dimensions of certainty. And we have to take into consideration what Western folks and academics have said about certainty. But this is the path. And it is for this reason, it's always going to be related to something experiential. And if I may at this point, and I forget whether we mentioned this last time or not, this is also one of the great contributions of Hujjat al-Islam Imam al-Ghazali. Because Hujjat al-Islam Imam al-Ghazali, that he mastered logic, he mastered philosophy, he mastered aqidah, and he mastered all of the instrumental sciences that you need, that in order to and this is what he did in Muqaddimah al-Dalal, is that he classified the various seekers of truth. And he had the theologians, and he had the philosophers, and he had what he calls the naturalists, and then he had that those that focus on piety, that want knowledge to be revealed, to be unveiled to them, the true nature of things, that in an experiential manner. And this whole book is about how that group of people are the true knowledge seekers. And that we were mentioning last night when we were speaking about this introduction to Saginaw, for some of those that were there, is that if you look at, there's a book that I'm reading right now called Why There Almost Certainly Is a God, by Keith Ward. He's one of these many people that have refuted, Richard Dawkins. And that he has a section in the beginning of his book where he brings up the question of what matters. What is matter? And increasingly, that you have kind of the Platonic version of what matter is, then that you have over the centuries different understandings that, so Plato in terms of substance, and that he also believed, although he believed in substance, is that it was infinitely, you could infinitely be divided. But there were people in history that believed that there was a smallest part that was the building block of all other things. But then once we kind of understand that even at the smallest level, the most micro levels, is that matter is both wave and particle, that's completely bewildering. So what is it then? And so that you even have scientists that have said that matter is a mystery. There's no way for us to understand matter. There's no consensus whatsoever in the scientific community about what matter is. And that you will find what he does in the book, he mentions an array of opinions. Like we have aqwal about what is the meaning of this is opinion, this is opinion. He mentions a series of opinions about what matter is. So if we can't even understand matter, which is to us the easiest thing for us, at least perceivably, to be able, we don't even understand the world that we live in, let alone the higher world, let alone that what's in the samawat, let alone that everything else that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created. We don't even understand that. So if that's the case, that there must be a constant for us that we can hold on to that will be the key for us to have that understanding. And what I'm trying to point to here is that it's understanding this dimension of our Prophet ﷺ that's so important. So that having said all of that, that the first aspect of understanding him ﷺ is understanding that he is the best of Allah Ta'ala's creation. And that Ibn Isra-Din ibn Salam has a very beautiful book, and it's been translated into English, that in Arabic it's called Bihayat al-Sul fi Tafdil al-Usul. And in English, what's it translated as? Bihayat al-Sul. It's translated by Aisha Bewley. And it's the beginning of, I forget that, can you just look up that? It's translated into English. And he talks about a number of the aspects of the greatness of the Prophet ﷺ. But our Prophet said in the Hadith in Sahih Muslim that أَنَا سَيِّدُ وَلَدِ آدَمْ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ, that I am the Sayyid of the children of Adam Yawm al-Qiyamah. That Yawm al-Qiyamah is a day that every single person will know who the Prophet is, who ever lived. That is a day for him where he will be granted the Muqam al-Mahmud, where no other prophet and messenger would even dare speak on the day that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will show his wrath in a way that he's never showed before, subhanahu wa ta'ala. That no one would even dare speak. If you want to bring this with that, that by way of, there's certain people that when they get angry, no one can speak to them. Except that they might have someone that's so close to them that when they're angry, that they say something that they might have, that but in terms of our Prophet ﷺ, on the day that Allah Ta'ala will show his wrath in ways that he's never done before, is that it's his day, ﷺ. He will be commanded to prostrate beneath the throne. Irfa' ra'sak, wasal tu'ta, ask and you will be given, ishfa' tushaffa, intercede, and you will be granted intercession. That is the Muqam al-Mahmud. And he says that I will be inspired with Muhammad, words of praise. La a'lamu al-an. I don't know them right now. And then he will praise his Lord subhanahu wa ta'ala, and this will open up the door for shafa'ah on this day. Everyone will know who our Prophet is, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, yawm al-qiyamah. Every single one on the face of this, every human being who lived on the face of this earth. And this is why that when Imam al-Busayri said what he said about the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, in the last chapter, or the second to last chapter of the Burda, about those people that ما لمن حلول به سواك عند حلول الحدث العمل. يا أكرم الخلق ما لمن حلول به سواك عند حلول الحدث العمل. He said that, O best of creation, that I had no refuge except you on the day that people will be exposed to many terrors. Right? That's ala haqiqati. That's not majazi. That's not figurative. Right? Why? Is because people quite literally will run to the Prophet ﷺ. Why did Allah set it up like this? That He didn't have to, subhanahu wa ta'ala. He could have had an individual judgment where there's no concept of intercession, and that it's between the creation and the Lord. Why on the day of judgment in the hadith al-Shafa'ah? We've heard time and time again, but I'm pointing to a particular point of that hadith. Do people run to Rasulullah and they seek the Prophet out, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam? So if our relationship about him, with him, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, was merely, okay, it's just about the message and not him, why is everyone running to him, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam? Why do people, when they enter into the fire, call, Allah Muhammadah? What did our Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam tell us in the hadith al-Shafa'ah? That he tells us that anyone who has a habbat khardal min iman, a mustard grain seed of iman, that they will exit from the fire. Or if they have adna habbat khardal min iman, the least bit of a mustard grain seed of iman, adna habbat khardal min iman, and the least bit of a mustard grain seed of faith will be taken out eventually, until anyone who says La ilaha illallah one time in their life. Our Prophet will go into hell and draw people out. And that this is the nuanced understanding of our deen that previous generations always understood. They understood is that our connection to the Prophet ﷺ is our connection to the deen. Our connection to him ﷺ will determine our connection to the deen. And this is not taking from the Prophet ﷺ being a human being. He was a human being, absolutely. Anyone that tells you that the Prophet benefits or harms outside of the Prophet of Allah, that's kufr. That's disbelief to believe that. No one's saying that. He was a human being, however, that he was not like other human beings. That he is the means for us to know the divine will. And part of that relates to our attachment to him. And what I'm really trying to get at is that to the degree that our hearts are to attach to him in his sunnah, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, is to the degree that our hearts will be colored, which is the degree that we will be able to do and reflect everything that Sadat and the Sahaba did in their time and the generations after them until Yawm al-Qiyamah. This is the secret of that connection. This is the secret of turning what you do in your life, whatever it is, whether you are a physician, whether you are an engineer, whether you are a lawyer, whether you are a teacher, whatever it is that you do, the secret of your effectiveness and the true meaning of the word effectiveness and your success and the true meaning of the word of success is to the degree that your heart is colored with these realities. And it will change what you do from being a tidal wave, from a ripple to a tidal wave. If you tap into this capacity internally, that it will open up doors that are very difficult to put into words. Even if you think outwardly that there's not really a big impact upon the people or what it is that you're doing. Is that the internal impact will be great. This is one of the things that we tend to forget, is that there are people that their existence that has an exponentially greater amount of impact, even though outwardly that they're only affecting maybe 5, 10, a very small group of people outwardly. Is that it's their internal impact. Our Prophet indicated to us by way of example these type of people. إِنَّمَا تُنْصُرُنَّ وَتُرْزَقُونَ بِدُعَفَائِكُمْ. Indeed, you are only given victory, and you are only received provision from the weak among you. Subhanallah. Yes, there are people that exist, that they are a means for the warding off the calamities of the Ummah of our Prophet ﷺ. That in a hadith where our Prophet encouraged us to make istighfar for the mu'mineen and mu'minat. He said in a hadith, من استغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات 25 أو 27 مرة في اليوم والليلة, that كتب ممن يرزق بهم أهل الأرض. That those who say every morning and evening, Astaghfirullah lil-mu'mineen wal-mu'minat, 25 or 27 times, they will be from the people that the people on the earth receive their sustenance through them. Meaning that they have something special about them based upon their relationship with Allah. And this is why as well that we have to be very careful in trying to create a monolithic type of Muslim. You need worshippers. You need people that focus on worship. You need people that focus on worship. That we need diverse communities. We need people that have different functions and fulfill different pieces of the puzzle. This is integral to our success as a Muslim community. So that if you look at this though, that one of the proofs of what I'm saying is that we analyze the last verse in Surah Al-Kahf, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that قُلْ, say, and this is Allah commanding the Prophet, قُلْ ya Muhammad, in brackets, say, O Muhammad, إِنَّمَا أَنَا بَشَرٌ مِثْلُكُمْ, indeed that I am a bashar, I am a human being like you. So yes, the Prophet was bashar. He was a human being. But what is to say right after that? Yuha ilayh, I received revelation. Right? Which human being received revelation? Right? The prophets and the messengers. So meaning that Allah is affirming here, yes, He is like you, but He's also not like you. Because He is a human being that receives revelation. And then Allah says, Yuha ilayh, أَنَّمَا إِلَهُكُمْ إِلَهٌ وَاحِدٌ, that indeed, that your Lord, that God is one God. So we have the Bashariyah, the humanness of the Prophet ﷺ. We have revelation, and then we have belief in Tawheed, in the oneness of God. Meaning that our understanding of the person of the Prophet ﷺ, that it directly relates to our understanding of revelation, which directly relates to our understanding of Tawheed itself. The most powerful principle in human history, monotheism. And so that if you take the Prophet ﷺ out of the equation, that you no longer have the other two. Understanding him, ﷺ, even in his human aspect, that it relates to our understanding of revelation, which relates to our understanding of the oneness of God, subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the whole point of this is that this is an integral part of our deen. And you can mention proof after proof after proof after proof of the companions of our Prophet ﷺ, and that their experiences with him, and the ways that they approached him, and the ways that they looked at him, that not only during his life, ﷺ, but after he passed away, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and that you could sum up that across the board, that all of the companions, is that they had an intense love in their heart for the Prophet ﷺ. And that many scholars would argue is that the secrets of the love of the Prophet ﷺ and how that relates to their realizing the building blocks of iman, of what it means to be a Muslim, iman, Islam, ihsan, that was facilitated to the degree of their love of the Prophet ﷺ. Because when you love the Prophet, that in reality, that love you have for the Prophet is a way of loving Allah and God. Why? Our Prophet said in Sahih Tirmidhi, أَحِبُّ اللَّهَ لِمَا يَبْلُوكُمْ بِهِ مِنْ نِعْمَةٍ. Love Allah for that which the blessings that He provides you with. وَأَحِبُّونِي لِحُبِّ اللَّهِ. Love me for the love of God, and love me for the sake of God. Meaning that your love of the Prophet ﷺ is love of God. Why? Because who made the Prophet ﷺ? Who gave him what He gave him? Rabbi. Right? You're loving someone that Allah commanded you to love, wants you to love, and has related many things to your love of Him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And that love is not something that you can just turn off and turn on in your heart. Right? You can't say, okay, I'm going to love you now. Well, I'm not going to love you anymore. I'm going to love you today, then I'm not going to love you tomorrow. Right? Love is the most powerful emotion within us. We can't turn it off. And you can't necessarily even turn it on. And how we attain love is a whole other topic in itself. But if you just look at the Sahaba, and that from Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq, to Sayyidina Umar al-Khattab, to Sayyidina Uthman bin Affan, to Sayyidina Ali bin Abi Talib, and on, and on, and on, and on. That why was it that if this affair was only about the message of Islam, why was it in multiple narrations? You've all heard these narrations many, many times. Multiple narrations. Every Sahaba that the Prophet asked said, ask me for what you want. Those Sahaba would serve the Prophet and do something for him. And the Prophet would say, ask what you want. What did they ask? Every single one. There's not one narration that I know of, and Allah knows best, where someone asked for anything else other than Murafaqatuka fil Jannah. I want to be with you in paradise. The Sahaba didn't know that the greatest pleasure of paradise was gazing upon the noble countenance of God. Of course they did. Why is it that across the board, every time, that they ask to be with the Prophet in paradise? Why didn't they ask for another Rawashid? Why didn't they ask to be in the heights in Firdaus? Why didn't they ask to die shaheed? Why? Because they understood is that their relationship to the Prophet ﷺ was their relationship to their deen, and they understood that to the degree that they were close to the Prophet ﷺ in the dunya, in the barzakh, and the akhirah, was to the degree that they would be close to Allah, was to the degree that all of the different types of na'im and pleasure in paradise would be distributed, is to the extent that they were close to the Prophet ﷺ. So they were seeking that closest to Him for those reasons, because they realized to the degree of that closeness was to the degree of all of these three meanings of success. They recognized that. And until that we can reinstate this and speak openly about this in our communities, that we have a lot of work to do, because we are inhibiting ourselves. We're paralyzed if we can't understand these meanings. And until that we can create in our communities ways that we can maturely allow these meanings to grow, and that there's ways of doing it, that we have to, if we can't do that, we are limiting ourselves. That if, for instance, you want the greatest way you can possibly protect your children of all, time and time again with your parents, time and time again with your parents, our children, how do we protect our children, how do we, right? The greatest way you could preserve your children, unconditionally, is to fill their hearts with the meanings of love of Allah and His Messenger. And to have them sing songs that help those meanings to come out. Right? This is the part of the early period. They used to do this. They greeted the Prophet when he's going to Medina. And they were singing with drums. And they said, "Nahnu jawar min bani Najari, habbada Muhammad al-Manjari." They were singing, beating drums. That we are young girls from Bani Najjar. Yeah, oh, what a wonderful neighbor Muhammad is. And then the Prophet says, "Inni wallahi la uhibbuk." He didn't say, "Astaghfirullah, don't sing. You're girls. Move out of the way. Don't beat a drum." He didn't say anything of that nature. He said, "Wallah," he swore an oath by God. "Indeed, I love you." Oh. What's the state of that young girl who has the best of creation tell her that he loves them? She's changed her life. She'll never forget that. That will be an indelible mark on her until the day that she dies. And then eternity. This is the way that they were. And I'm not saying that we don't get involved in, I'm just speaking in the other room. We need to get involved in the details of society, understand our society, be involved, study theology and philosophy, and understand science, and understand all of the different dynamics of our times, and the trends, and the philosophical currents, and all this type of thing, and politics, and who we should vote for or not vote for, what are the problems, all these other type of things. They're all important, don't get me wrong. But what I'm trying to put out at this moment is that the secret in all of that, the fuel that's going to allow us to correctly analyze all of that and respond uniquely, creatively, based upon the principles of our deen, this is the heart of the issue, is here. And if you take this out, this is the key of all of the thawabit, of all of the unchanging principles. This is the greatest of them all. The love of Allah and His Messenger. That if you remove that out, if you take that out, that you are setting yourself up, your children up, your communities up for failure. If we do not create environments long-term in this country where these meanings can be grown and they can be produced and they can be sustained after that, that it's very difficult to do what we need to do, and that when children these meanings seep into their hearts at an early age, is that those meanings in and of themselves are the greatest protection, and that those meanings will protect them. That if you teach them to sing songs in praise of the Prophet ﷺ, is that, and they taste its sweetness, they're not going to want to listen to music. If you get them used to attending gatherings where the Prophet is being mentioned, and they're serving tea, and people are happy, and people are together, right? They're not going to want to go party with their friends. That if you get, this is, I'm very serious about this. But to expect children to just be these ideal kids that and not providing an alternative, So anyhow, that let's move on here, and then we'll open up the floor for questions. That there's many ways in which we know the Prophet ﷺ, and that the primary way is through the Book of Allah. There's a number of explicit references to the Prophet ﷺ, just as there is a number of implicit references to our Prophet ﷺ. The second way that we know our Prophet is through the hadith literature in his sunnah. In other words, his words, his acts, and his tacit approvals, which are called his taqrirat, his tacit approvals. The third way that we can know the Prophet is through his Sira, is through his life story. Sorry, your Sira was to travel, but your Sira is your life, it's who you are, it's your life story. And a fourth way that we can know the Prophet ﷺ is through the Shama'il literature. Now there's always a bit of an overlap between the Shama'il and the Sira. The Shama'il relates to the inward and outward characteristics. The word in Arabic, Shimal, that it means a tab'a. Now we're not talking about Shimal, which is a direction. We're talking about now in another context. Shimal means a tab'a. It means your nature. And so that Shama'il, which is the plural Shimal, relates to the nature of someone, who they are. In other words, their characteristics. And then the scholars then used the word Shama'il to refer to the inward and outward characteristics of our Prophet ﷺ. Even the outward characteristics of the Sira is that they transmitted them in great detail. In great detail. And our scholars didn't do things abathan, in vain. If you look at the narrations of Sayyidina Ali and Hind ibn Abi Hala, and the others who describe Sayyidina Muhammad, as that Sayyidina Hassan, Sayyidina Hussein, the grandchildren of the Prophet ﷺ, and others asked about the Prophet's physical description. They would have asked about the physical description if it wasn't important. And it's a sign of that if our Prophet himself is a sign, that part of it, that is his physical beauty, is the way that he used to look, and how Allah Ta'ala created him. And it's important because the Sahaba transmitted it. And that then beyond his physical looks and constitution was his character, in learning how he was. And then even beyond that, which is another way that we can know the Prophet is the salawat literature, that from the time of the companions to those who came after them, is that we have a whole collection of salawat, of different salawat that were written about the Prophet. Now a lot of people don't know about that. But if you look at the book by Shaykh Yusuf al-Nabahani, a great scholar from Lebanon, passed in the year 1350, he has a book titled Afdal al-Salawat. He also has a book titled Sa'adat al-Dalain, the Salat al-Sayyid al-Kunayn. And that he mentions different salawats on Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, And that there were Sahaba themselves that had salawat. And different formulas, forms, a way of praying upon him, which point to some of the internal aspects of his meaning, where some scholars say that when Allah says in the Quran, إِنَّكَ بِأَعْيُنِنَا إِنَّكَ بِأَعْيُنِنَا, that moves the hearts of the lovers of Sayyidina Muhammad. إِنَّكَ بِأَعْيُنِنَا. Allah is saying to the Prophet إِنَّكَ, indeed you, بِأَعْيُنِنَا. And you are under our liberty, that a'yun's eyes. But here, that it doesn't have an anthropomorphic meaning, that it means you are under our care. La ilaha illallah. And if you look at Surah Taha, Taha is one of the names of Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. His name is Yasin and his name is Taha. And that although in general the huruf al-muqata'a, the unconnected letters, that our scholars have said that, Allahu a'lam bi muradihi, Allah only knows their means. Others have offered possible meanings of Ta and Ha, and that some would say that is Allah is addressing the Prophet, Ya Taha Ya Hadi. This is not just me saying this and making this up, this is in Tafsir. And some would say that it refers to Ya Taha Ya Hadi. But if you look at the beginning of the surah, Taha ma anzalna alayka al-Qur'ana litashqa ila tadhkiratan liman yakhsha tanzil mimman khalaqa al-arda was-samawati al-ula ar-Rahmanu 'ala al-'arshi istawa lahu ma fi as-samawati wa ma fi al-ardi wa ma baynahuma wa ma tahta ath-thara. And then, that after these initial verses, Allah starts to talk about the story of Moses. Taha is a surah about tasriyah. One of the main themes of Taha is Allah's bringing solace to our Prophet ﷺ. And by particular mentioning the story of Moses, so we have one of the most detailed descriptions of the Prophet Moses in Surah Taha, where Allah tells us about all of his details. But the meanings underlying the story of Moses is that when he goes to the burning bush, that Allah Ta'ala says to him, إِنَّنِي أَنَا رَبُّكَ فَاخْلَعْ عَلَيْكَ إِنَّكَ بِالْوَادِ الْمُقَدَّسِ طُوًى. That indeed I am your Lord in the first person. That take off your two sandals. Indeed that you are in the sacred valley of Tuwa. وَأَنَا اخْتَرْتُكَ. La ilaha illallah. I have chosen you. فَاسْتَمِعْ لِمَا يُوحَى. Listen to what is going to be revealed. إِنَّنِي أَنَا اللَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا أَنَا فَاعْبُدْنِي وَقِيمُ الصَّلَاةَ لِذِكْرِي. Indeed that I am Allah. There is no God but me. In the first person. Sometimes God says, La ilaha illa huwa. Sometimes La ilaha illa anta. Here, La ilaha illa ana. And that's significant for what Moses is experiencing, for God making himself known to Moses and speaking to him now in the first person. That established prayer from our remembrance. Worship me and establish the prayer from our remembrance. And then that Allah will recount the story of Pharaoh. And then that everything that Moses goes through, and that is telling him to go to Pharaoh, and then the Moses requesting for him to send a wazir with him, and so on and so on. And then that towards the end, later on in the story, that Allah sums up the story of Moses with Timshi Ukhtuka, that his sister was walking and so forth, and explains as summary of his life, وَأَلْقَيْتُ عَلَيْكَ مَحَبَّةً مِّنِّي وَلِتُصْنَعَ عَيْنِي إِذْ تَشْتَقُونَ فَتَقُولُ هَلْ أَدُلُّكُمْ عَلَى مَا تَقُولُونَ. And then that I have cast love upon you, and so that you may do things under my supervision. And then after all of that, there's a summary of his life story. Then what does Allah say? وَاسْتَنَعْتُكَ بِنَفْسِي. Allah is telling Moses, وَاسْتَنَعْتُكَ بِنَفْسِي. Allahu Akbar. Allah is telling Moses, I have created you for me. Everything that Moses went through, from the beginning to the end, being thrown in the ocean, raised up in the palace of Pharaoh, everything he experienced, all the tribulations, killing the Egyptian, having to flee, all of that
the time that he spent in Madian, the time that he spent working for Shaykh, and all of that was the na'tuka nafsi. I have created you for me. In other words, I have put you through all of that because I want to give you the greatest gift of all, that's knowledge of me. This is tasliyah for our Prophet ﷺ. And then when you tap your hearts into these means, they said this opens up a side of you where you can put the dunya and the akhirah in perspective. You can put all of your pursuits in perspective, all of your intellectual inquiries in perspective. Everything that you do, all of your service, everything, is that you really have to put it and understand what this ultimately is all about. We're all going to die and meet Allah. وَمَنْ وَجَدَ اللَّهُ وَجَدَ كُلِّ شَيْءٍ. Whoever marries and knows Allah has attained everything. And if someone that knows everything has attained everything but that, they've lost everything and they're entirely bankrupt. This is what it's all about. And so the salawat literature are a way that we know Sayyidina Muhammad, as well as his khasa'is. He has a large 2-volume work about the khasa'is, the special qualities of our Prophet ﷺ. But in particular, that we'll be focusing here on how the Shama'il relates to the Sira. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala open up our hearts to these understandings of who our Prophet was, who he is, and whom he will be. Yawm al-Qiyamah, connect our hearts to him. And inshallah, that will open up the floor for a few questions before we take a little break. Inshallah.